I think the challenge is when people say, if you get enough steps, you're good, don't do exercise. But the reason I think we need to do it is because it's a very intensive, potentially, I shouldn't say intensive, it's a very focused, purposeful, structured time to get a very specific neurobiological smoothie, depending on what you're doing, right? And so what's the difference between snacking and a meal?
You're listening to the Live Life Longer show with Dan Voss, helping people live longer through natural practices like cold exposure, sauna use, breath work, exercise, intermittent fasting, and the healing powers of nature. In this week's episode, my guest is Ryan Glatt, a personal trainer and brain health coach with over a decade of experience. He currently practices brain-based strategies for cognitive enhancement at the Pacific Brain Health Center in Los Angeles. Ryan has pursued education from the Amin Clinics, the Neuroscience Academy, Academy for Brain Health and Performance, and the Masters of Applied Neuroscience program at King's College of London. He has worked with a wide variety of populations with various neurological considerations, including those with MCI, dementia, TBI, and Parkinson's. Ryan focuses his practice and research towards slowing cognitive decline for those with cognitive complaint and those who want to prevent neurodegenerative conditions. He actively consults for technology companies that seek to enhance physical activity with cognitive training through virtual reality, mobile technology, and various hardware, software applications. Ryan, welcome to the Live Life Longer show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into some interesting conversation with you today around neuroscience, the brain, but specifically with exercise and how exercise can impact our brain positively. So before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of neuroscience and your work, why don't we start with some basics around the brain? So what is the brain and what is its function overall as it relates to the human body?
Yeah, so the brain is an organ. We have many organs, but it's part of the central nervous system, which is comprised of the spinal cord and the brain. And the brain is an organ that's very distinctly different from other organs in the sense that it allows cognition or thinking. Of course, there's been a lot of research on like embodied cognition and how other parts of our body have intelligence, but it's not to say that the other parts of the body don't have innervation and react to environmental stimuli in the internal and external worlds. It's more to say that it possesses electrical properties and mental functions like cognitive abilities such as attention, memory, reaction time, executive functioning, things of that regard. It's also a very metabolically hungry organ, uses quite a high percentage of oxygen and nutrients in blood. And it's what allows us to have a lot of things. I think a lot of people want to go into the idea around consciousness and spirituality and energy, but in my opinion, it's what allows us to have identity, sense of self, which are all aspects of cognition and interact with the external and internal worlds.
Sure.
Be our internal selves and interact with the environment, interact with others, be able to work, be able to play. And so our brains, allow our bodies to function. And certainly with more brain function, we get perhaps more out of our body. With more bodily function, perhaps more of it out of our brain. And so there has been a separation between the two. I think there's a lot of pushback against the brain. People are too neuro-focused, and that's why people are saying things like the gut is the second brain, and really saying it has a lot of intelligence, and it is important, but it is not the same thing as the brain. And so the brain is one of the most unique organs that allows us to interact with the world around us. Our gut does not allow us to interact with the world around us. Certainly it's important to have that gut function, but there's truly no other organ like the brain. On the other hand, we have what would be called neuro worship, where people worship the brain. They don't freeze their spleen in case they're cyborgs in the future. They pay to freeze their brain, and so there's a couple different philosophies there of looking at the brain. But certainly, no one will disagree that it's extremely important. And when it doesn't work well, our quality of life tends to be lower. So that's what the brain is. I think that's its importance, generally speaking.
Yeah, it's a really good synopsis. Tell us maybe what got you into the the idea of exercise and how it relates to the brain. Was there something there that intrigued you to study exercise?
Yeah, so my interest was actually always animal behavior. I watched a lot of Animal Planet and the cheesy animal movies like Air Bud, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like how do they train animals? I was observing how they behave. I was just fascinated by that.
Sure.
I actually wanted to be an exotic animal trainer and work in like animal conservation. And so there, in my hometown in Moore Park, California, there's a community college that has the nation's only exotic animal training and management program. So I'm like, perfect. I like animals on TV in my hometown. There is a program for that. So my goal was to, up to community college was to go into that program. And I followed that dream consistently. And then I got rejected from that program because it's like a lottery system because it's not a private college. So they don't have the same selection criteria or process.
Hmm.
But a year before that, in my senior year of high school, I was overweight as a kid, and I grew up pretty overweight, pretty sedentary. Played a lot of video games. My mother loved to bake, and so she wasn't that healthy, and so neither was myself, my brother, and my dad. We are all
Hmm.
pretty overweight and not that healthy. And there was a thing that came out in the '90s called Dance Dance Revolution, and that was a video game that combined movement, and so that's what got me to move. I actually lost a
Huh.
lot of off Dance Dance Revolution. And in middle school, I even brought it to my physical education teacher. I said, hey, try this out. This is what I've been doing for exercise. I know I finished last in the mile, but this is how I move. This is what most.
Nice.
And we actually played it together in the auditorium. It was a lot of fun. And then, that actually motivated me to join the gym. So there's a gym that opened up across the street from my high school. And my other fat friends and I made a pact to join it and get in shape. When I was going there, I lifted weights more and I started doing more cardio without the gaming side of things. I met a personal trainer there that gave me some tips, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. He kind of mentored me a little bit. I said, you know what? I've had a lot of success, and it changed my cognition because I had a traumatic
Mm.
brain injury as a kid. It made me more social. I think aesthetics, I think are important because it did change the way people looked at me.
Mm.
I interacted and how I felt confident. I didn't have a six pack. I wasn't ripped by any means, but I just wasn't as fat, and that made a big difference in my confidence and how I carried
Sure.
myself at the time. And it just kind of opened up my life, and psychologically, cognitively, socially, physically, and I want to help other people do the same. Which it's not too different than most personal trainer stories. I had a transformation. I want to help other people transform because
Mm.
it was so important to me, and I see that it's possible. And the body has the ability to change. Of course, I wasn't explicitly aware of the cognitive effects of what I was going through at the time, or I couldn't place it exactly. I continued to still be a gamer and do active video games and stuff like that, especially as the Nintendo Wii came out and the Microsoft Xbox Kinect came out. And so when I got rejected from that animal science program, I found that there was a personal training program at my community college. So I joined that, and you could basically take the class for a semester and test out to become a certified personal trainer. So I did
Mm.
that. I got a job at 24 Hour Fitness, and I started training people. Then I left when I went to get my bachelor's of exercise science from Cal Lutheran University. And then I started to see my mom go through more health issues. She had gestational diabetes. She had kidney disease that led to a leg amputation, and she went through a lot of
Mm.
physical therapy. I said, just watching her process, working as a PT aide myself, and just seeing what she was going through with her allyship with her physical therapist, I said I wanted to be a physical therapist. So I went down that
Mm.
route. Applied to physical therapy schools, didn't get in, so I went international, did a gap year in West Africa, went to Scotland for a 2-year physical therapy program, or physiotherapy as they call it over there. Had a visa issue, got sent home.
Wow.
Then I pursued body work. I became a rolfer or a structural integrator, and that's how I kind of combined my exercise and corrective exercise and pain science and manual therapy all together.
Hmm.
Did practice out of Los Angeles, worked on golfers, worked on CEOs, worked at a pelvic floor facility, pelvic floor physical therapy facility. Did a lot of kind of varied random stuff. And then I realized I'm like, okay, these people are having trouble not just with pain and exercise, but really just changing their behavior, whether it's
Mm.
stress regulation, emotional regulation, doing the things I told them to do, paying attention to our exercise routines, forgetting completely what we did last time. I'm like, there's something going on here with not just their body, but their brain, right?
Hmm.
From an emotional perspective, a cognitive perspective, how can I help them with that? So I kind of like revisited what I was doing as a personal trainer. I was always more of a corrective exercise guy. I said, okay, I'm kind of doing health coaching a little bit. Siri thought I was talking to her. Sorry. I just butts in. It's so rude. But so I was trying to bring back what I was doing as a personal trainer to help people because I was looking into the neuroscience a little bit and say, wow, exercise really helps.
Yep.
Maybe that can help their cognition and help change their behavior. And if I'm health coaching them, this and that. So I said, I got burnt out on, this glorified body work, massage therapy type stuff. And so I just quit. And then I started working at a neurofeedback facility, the Peak Brain Institute in Los Angeles. I started to look into alternative forms of adding cognitive load to exercise routines because there was some research coming out showing that could be differentially or uniquely beneficial more than playing games or exercise alone. We can get into that. And so they kind of just went down this like really windy route. And then like kind of after all those frustrations, I'm like, okay, I think I can intersect the gaming, the neuroscience, the exercise, the health coaching into a problem. I started working with people with ASD or ADHD, kids with traumatic brain injury, then kind of moved into adults, then older adults, and kind of ended up right here after kind of networking with some researchers and finding out that this Pacific Brain Health Center about 3 years ago was being built, and they wanted to build sort of a brain gym type of program with brain health coaching. I said, this is great, and sort of followed my education in parallel. About 1 year into me working here, I entered a Master's of Applied Neuroscience, and as I started to find that my journey was really windy and kind of inefficient and kind of all over the place, kind of ADHD like I am, I started to say, well, how would other health and fitness professionals go about this? Right. How would they learn the neuroscience basics, then the neuroscience of exercise? And then once you know about it, what do you do about it? Like, so just saying exercise is good for the brain is cool, but is it good enough? Like, what do we do differently with that information? And just like with different foods do different things to your body and brain, what about different types of exercise? Is every exercise prescription created equally? What about this idea of exergaming and combining cognitive tasks with movements? Is that different? I started to ask all these questions and then connect it to a problem, which most of the time is neurological or neurodegenerative diseases or the prevention thereof. But I still, even though I primarily work with geriatrics, I in education and talking to people externally to my job, I talk a lot to people who are our age or 20, 30, 40, 50, people with concussions, people that just want to optimize. So I kind of got this breadth, and I like to keep it that way because everyone's a human. Every human typically has a brain, and usually people have the concern of maintaining or optimizing their brain.
Sure.
So that's how I came to be where I'm at.
Wow. It's such a cool story. I love that piece about your upbringing of not coming from a healthy environment or family, struggling with weight. And, it seems like a lot of people in the health industry or fitness, they might have that upbringing, they're surrounded by that and they just kind of continue that on throughout their life. But I find it really cool, someone like yourself that is able to, see what the life you were living and realize that you didn't want to go down that path and you made changes.
Yeah, and I was actually the first one in my family and still am to kind of pursue like a health profession too. So health was never really valued. And I think wherever there's a problem, curiosity kind of brought me towards a solution. And with my mother has since passed and my grandmother has since passed, but with my family that's still alive and that I speak to, I try to. It's cool because I get to see them become healthier and see their lives get better too. Keep them around longer, right?
Yeah.
Or at least with a higher quality of life. And so, and certainly finding that so many conditions are preventable, or at least we have this trajectory, and even if it is your destiny to get something, that we can modify the trajectory or modify the quality of life. And I think that's really important. Just finding that there's so many people talking about fat loss and pain management and athletic performance and just general lifespan medicine and optimization, like generally, like live longer. But I'm finding that most people have a primary health goal, whether it's spoken or realized or not, about brain health. And I'm finding a lot of even people in the biohacking or optimizer space have issues around their brain health that haven't really been addressed. And they've kind of like gone with these distractions of passive intervention, are touted to be beneficial, whether they're beneficial or not. I'm just finding that a lot of people don't get to the core big rocks of brain health that need to be moved in order to modify your cognitive performance, your trajectory over the lifespan, so on and so forth.
Yeah, 100%. I think you may have already touched on this with the Dance Dance Revolution idea. I I
Yeah.
love that. I think you're probably not the only one that found enjoyment out of that activity and then turned it into a habit of exercise.
Oh yeah, I think exergaming, it's called exercise and gaming, exergaming
Yeah.
is really popular, and there's actually a lot of research on its importance and effectiveness in kids with and without intellectual disabilities or disorders, older adults, neurological populations like stroke, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, multiple sclerosis. Well, things like Dance Dance Revolution, the Nintendo Wii, the Xbox Connect, they're not that prevalent
Mm,
anymore. You're not going to find them at Target
sure.
really. Well, you know, people in our age group aren't really using them as much. They kind of moved on to a new era of gaming, which we can talk about.
Mm,
They're still being researched, and they've kind of like there's a lot of research on them, and they've kind of moved on into clinical settings or research settings, which is really cool.
yeah.
And I think it speaks to kind of like novel technologies. It takes a while to research them, but there's things now like extra gaming continues to be a thing. Like, you know, the Nintendo Switch is kind of the new console, and there's something
Yep.
called Ring Fit Adventure that a lot of people are using. And it's funny because I have coworkers that are my age, but I have doctors that I work with, and their kids are playing it too. So it's like intergenerational.
Sure.
This concept, and I do a lot of virtual reality gaming. So I have an Oculus Quest 2, and I do tons of extra, really high intensity, cognitively demanding, fun exercise in that. And that's been my quarantine savior.
Yeah.
And so it continues to be prevalent. It will continue to be prevalent. And as adoption of things like virtual reality, augmented reality,
Yep.
if you look at cardiovascular exercise machines, they have screens, and you can kind of go through mountains as a
Mm,
simulation on immersive virtual reality. I wouldn't say it's gaming per se, but it's simulation.
yeah.
And all itself is like more cognitively demanding. I think it's going to become more and more common. It's going to become a normal thing
Sure.
that's going to sort of penetrate. It's like sort of entertainment with exercise, right?
Right.
It, this external goal. With that goal, there's cognitive demands, and they're all kind of different. But yeah, that stuff's it's been around,
Right.
right? It's going to be around in different ways, and people are going to continue to adopt it, I
Yep.
believe.
Yeah, you mentioned augmented reality, and as you were saying that, I was thinking about Pokemon Go, the fad that was out a
Right.
number of
Yeah,
years
that's a
ago.
great
Yeah.
case study.
Yeah.
And still, there's tons of people across massive age groups still playing that, even within quarantine, and they're just like stoked to get out again,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
These pervasive technologies will continue to exist. I don't think I don't think everything is for everybody. I don't think one thing solves all the problems, but it is a concept, the gamification concept that can be paired with technology and
Yes.
exercise that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. How about just enjoyment, finding enjoyment in exercise as a whole? It doesn't necessarily have to be gamification, but just
No, not at all. I
finding,
think people hear the benefits when I
yeah,
talk about them, and they fixate on it, like, oh, I got to do that, and they don't enjoy it, or it is burdensome, or it is cost prohibitive, or they just don't like technology, or they struggle with it.
yep,
So absolutely, it's not about the gaming. It's just the
right,
concept of enjoyment, and the
yeah,
concept of enjoyment. I think people hear, especially when we're like thinking about lifestyle optimization. Like, I can't tell you what percentage of podcasts will probably say high intensity interval training is the best,
right,
right? Okay, it's beneficial, but
sure.
why would is kale
What
the
makes it the
best?
best? Right.
The best. So we would never say that about a food, but we say that with exercise,
Mm,
or zone two aerobic training is the best for longevity. This one study came out and said racket sports are the best. Like, people love saying,
right.
but it's just wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't ignore data that there's a clue that it's beneficial in a unique manner, but it's not the best,
Yep.
right? And so that's a big problem. And another big problem is that real respected experts that are really well qualified are saying that stuff. And I think that's what we need to be careful of.
Mm,
But the reason I bring that up because it is about enjoyment. There's been some smaller studies in different populations, kids, older adults, showing that when people don't enjoy what they're doing, they actually don't get that much benefit,
yeah.
if at all.
Yeah.
And so enjoyment is a really big component. There's neurophysiological reasons for that. There's a neurochemical rationale. There's a psychological rationale. There's a hormonal rationale for that, or an endocrine rationale. There's a social community rationale. There's a lot of explanations for it. But
Definitely.
enjoyment really key. And when we're talking about behavior change, certainly something you enjoy that you look forward to is going to be helpful. Now,
Yeah.
do you have to enjoy all aspects of your exercise program in the same way at the same level?
Right.
No. I mean,
Right.
people like to joke of like, oh, that was really hard and I hated it, but you did it. You
Yep.
enjoyed something about it,
Mm.
right? Was it the fact you were pushing yourself? Was it the fact that you feel good immediately after? The acute neurophysiological, cognitive, and mood effects of exercise? Is it the community? Is it that you feel you made someone else proud? Is it that you feel you're investing in your life bank and you're saving that account, right? And you're extending your longevity? Or is it a combination of those things, which it often is?
Yep.
So enjoyment is so important. That's where, especially with the geriatric population that I'm working with, I just like to ask the question, what did you used to do? Could be what you used to do before quarantine. What did you used to do as a kid or earlier in life? And ask about it. And when I hear that from people, and I'm just so happy to hear, oh, I love to dance. Like, oh, why don't you dance? Oh, we just stopped doing it. I'm like, okay, well, what if we could bring that back? Here are the brain benefits of it.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, well, it's quarantine. I can't. Well, actually, there's this resource. Oh, really? And so it opens the door for going from less optimal to more optimal in a variety of ways.
Yeah, 100%. I'll give you some stories, personal stories of what I enjoy, and then you can maybe let me know what you think if I'm doing it right or wrong. So prior to COVID, my form of exercise would be running. I used to do long distance running, and then even
Yeah.
before that, I would spend a lot of time in the gym. You know, I grew up with sports. I grew up playing football and running tracks. I spent a lot of time in the gym lifting heavy weights. After high school or college, you know, I kind of got burnt out of that. I just didn't find enjoyment out of it, didn't find it fulfilling. And it was hard for me to get to the gym on a consistent basis because I just lost the passion there. And then that's when I got into
Right.
long distance running. And then after a few marathons and a few years of long running, kind of lost the enjoyment of that. And then with COVID, I ended up getting a puppy, and now I'm going on walks, you know, several times a day. Now I'm up to like 10 to 15,000 steps a day, and it's something I look forward to. You know, it's with my dog. I get to go out. I get to have fun. We go to the dog park. I get to see
Yeah.
her running around with other dogs.
It's quite universal. This enjoyment of walking your dog.
Right? Yeah. It's like, how can you not love walking your dog or spending time with your dog in general?
I was just today. I was talking to like a 84-year-old that is by himself, and that is the one thing he does, and it
Yeah.
brings him so much joy.
Yep.
Like, yeah, like why would you say something's not good enough when you enjoy that? Or like,
Exactly.
you can add to it, of course, but that's an amazing example.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I'm now, instead of going to the gym, I mean, not only am I not going because of COVID and lockdowns, but even before that, I wasn't enjoying the gym. So now I'm doing like resistance band exercises, and
Okay.
it's quick exercise. They're like 20-minute workouts, and I'm only doing them like 3 or 4 days a week. And for me,
Are you doing it on your own volition, or is it a class?
it's a
with
program.
therapists?
Yeah, it's a program. It's called 10X. And for me, that is manageable. You know, I'm able to I can commit 20, 30 minutes a day. Going to the gym and spending an hour or two, I personally I won't get much out of that. So that's been my
Who said
protocol.
you have to do that?
Yeah, no one said I have to do that. I guess society does, especially in our age group, 29-year-old male. It's like, you got to be at the gym lifting heavy weights. And I'm learning, like, no, I don't. I can go out for long walks and I can do my resistance
Did that
band.
come from like just our community online? That's what people do. That's what they're posting. That's what they say, or
Yeah.
is it more coming from like your experience in the weight room?
Great question. I think both. I think a little bit of both, and probably more so of my experience of my upbringing and playing football and being around, having three
Yeah.
older brothers, right, and just like always being around that like masculinity.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to learn that there's other ways.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing 20 minutes 3 to 4 times a week of this resistance band workout, and you feel you're appropriately challenged by that.
Yeah, I do. It's
Great.
incredible.
So-
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're walking your dog.
walking my dog, getting my 10 to 15,000 steps a day. Yeah.
Anything else that you're doing right now?
No, I would say that's probably about everything. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Great.
Does that sound good?
You're doing it.
Sounds like I'm. I'll tell you what. I'm feeling
What would
better
be
than I
bad?
ever.
What would be possibly bad about it?
I guess nothing. I guess I just have,
Right.
like we were saying, I have this thought in my head that it needs to be this like soul crushing.
Maybe it's not
workout.
enough.
Yeah, maybe it's not.
Maybe it's not enough,
Yeah.
or So maybe there's a frequency question or a higher intensity
Probably
question.
higher intensity. Yeah.
Okay. So if on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how would you rate your resistance band workouts?
In terms of effectiveness and intensity and just like feeling
Intensity,
good.
like out of breath or
I would say probably 6. That's where I feel like I
okay,
need
so
to.
6 out of 10.
Yeah, I feel like I need to up the intensity
Okay.
a bit there.
Okay, so it's a moderate
Yeah.
intensity. Okay. Yeah, so what are your goals? I mean, is it just general lifespan and optimization? Is there a specific cognitive goal you have? Do you want to improve your information processing speed, certain aspects of memory, organization, and attention? What is it you're looking to perhaps improve?
I honestly want to just feel good and look good, right? Like I want to look in the mirror and feel proud of myself and not
Okay.
look at the mirror and be like, wow, this guy's sitting on the couch all day. Um,
Do you
yeah,
feel proud of yourself
I
now?
do. Yeah, I've been in the program
Okay.
for almost 2 months now, so
So you're proud of
I
yourself.
am. Yeah,
We can check that
can check
off.
that one off.
Good. But we want to keep it that way and maybe keep going a little bit, it sounds like.
Yeah,
And you said you want to feel better. Do you mean energy, mood, cognition, just general?
yeah, all of the above. Mood, energy.
Okay,
Yep,
cool.
better sleep.
Got it. So if you have like a general brain health goal like that, that's good because we can maybe, but we have to give a more general recommendation. But it doesn't have to be that general. So the physical activity guide, and I love that we're using you as a
I
case
know. I
study.
love this.
We'll get your money's worth. So
Right.
the physical activity guideline for Americans, second edition, for a variety of health outcomes, including brain health, even weight loss, metabolic health, all sorts of stuff. There's a huge amount of different benefits that come from exercise. So
Hmm.
that, I think a question that's relevant is what's the minimum dosage of that, right? So they say 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise. That comes down to 5 times a week of 30 minutes, 3 times a week of 45 to 60 minutes. There's a lot of different configurations that you could have.
Okay.
And there's additional benefits for strength training, like 2, 3 times a week, and additional benefits for something called neuromotor training, which is kind of a category that includes hand-eye coordination, coordination exercises, motor exercises. So that could include more metabolically demanding categories like dance, sports, and martial
Hmm.
arts. But it could also mind-body activities like yoga, tai chi, qigong, and Pilates. Okay, so those three categories are aerobic, resistance, and neuromotor. You're doing
Hmm.
resistance. You're doing enough. And so total, and I would say you're walking your dog is good. It's getting your physical activity, but it's not exercise. Now, physical activity is good for the brain, cerebral blood flow, the volume of the temporal lobes, which are partially responsible for memory, grow in response to more walking and
Hmm.
steps. So I wouldn't say you need more steps, but you might need more
Hmm.
intensity. And of course, in order to do that, we'd have to increase frequency and or duration
Okay.
of exercise. Now, what you're telling me is that 20 to 30 minutes works best for you. But you also told me that you're currently doing 20 minutes of this resistance band workout.
Hmm.
It's a 6 out of 10 of intensity. You're doing it 3 to 4 times a week. So that's going to be 60 to 80 minutes a week of a moderate intensity form of exercise. So you definitely don't need to do more resistance training.
Okay.
If you added 10 minutes to those workouts, you'd be at 30 minutes, right? And that would be 90 to 120 minutes of
Yep.
exercise. And then if you added one more day a week of 30 minutes, you'd be at 150.
Got it.
So all we could do is, so from a behavior change standpoint, we may not do this dramatic change in your program, but if I said, could you add 10 minutes to that, what you're doing 3 to 4?
Yeah.
Probably,
Yep.
right?
Easly.
No, you're smiling because that's
Yeah.
easy,
Exactly.
right? So and what could it be? Because it's like a 20-minute video that you're following,
Right.
right? So what if we added 10 minutes of high intensity interval training at the
Mm.
end or the beginning?
Yeah.
What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
I think that's totally doable.
So maybe we take advantage of the 7 minute workout type
Yep.
stuff. That's, high intensity body weight, get that cardio in there. That way you get that from a 6 to a 10, a 6 out of 10 to maybe like an 8 out of 10. So you're hitting the intensity, you're getting more cardio, you're only doing 10 minutes more,
Mm.
you're feeling like you're getting that higher intensity, and you're only adding maybe one more day a
Yeah.
week. Not that bad.
Right.
Not that bad. Right? So now that we're at least 150 minutes, and we're meeting a higher intensity goal, and we're getting more aerobic exercise, we can talk about why that might be important. There's a reason they recommend that. There's neurobiological reasons like blood flow and neurotransmitters and general brain health and neurotrophic factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor and stuff like that. And there's a reason you want to do aerobic exercise and resistance, because the profile that they release of these growth factors is going to be both unique and similar in some ways. There's growth factors like irisin that are mostly released with skeletal muscle contraction from or resistance training. BDNF is primarily going to come from HIIT. You're probably going to get a good amount of BDNF from the HIIT training. Or it's not just HIIT. BDNF comes from aerobic exercise at about a 60 to 80% of your max intensity, or for layman's terms, 6 to 8 out of 10, right? I think people ask, well, what's the best? That's not that important right now. If you did what you're doing, I think you'd get there.
Yeah.
The last category you'd be missing, right, if we wanted to be comprehensive, would be the neuromotor category.
Okay.
Right? Did you kind of self-identify that was the missing one for you? Yeah. So the question is, what would that be? And that's where we come back to the original question, which is, what would you enjoy?
So what
is it? A dance? Is it a sport? Is it a martial art? Is it a mind-body activity? And so we kind of dig in. We have to, or maybe it's something you've always wanted to try. Is it exergaming? That's part of neuromotor as well. So this is where it becomes less about what I have to do and more about what are my options.
Sure.
And it's like the excitement of sitting down at the restaurant and picking from a list versus getting a prescription pad and thinking it's an order. That's the
Got it.
When we talk about optimal or ideal or recommended, that comes with all this crap that feels like, can I handle this? And if I don't handle it, am I a failure? Am I a wussy? Am I not a man? Am I just too stupid or just not motivated enough? Okay, let me take, this next workshop or boost my willpower or fix my mindset. Okay, we can avoid going down that route if we just picked an activity that you want to do, right? If you want to play tennis or you want to do Zumba and you pick that, if you're like, of course I'll do it Tuesday, Thursday, and I'll do it for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Not only are you adding more minutes, it's at a moderate to vigorous intensity, you're getting the cognitive demands, but you enjoy it.
Yeah.
So it's completely shifting that conversation. And that's why I like taking that approach that you brought up.
That's awesome. That was so cool. I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I love when something like that happens on the podcast that's unexpected, where it's like, let's just use you as a case study here and we'll break it down. So thank you for...
Well, we're not done. We didn't pick an activity that you like that's in the neuromotor category. So we got to complete the story.
That's right. Yes. Okay, so let's go through. So what are some of the main options I would have here? You mentioned things like tennis. What are some of the other big ones?
Yeah, so we can go the more metabolically challenged one, like dance, sports, martial arts. And there's a lot of different versions of sports, right? There's the racket sports. There's a couple studies that have shown, like longitudinal studies, that show they really contribute to longevity, and we don't know why. Could be because of the social component. I want to bias myself and think because it's more cognitively stimulating. But it was a longitudinal study, I believe, in the... I'll probably butcher that. And it's kind of like the European equivalent of the Framingham Heart Study.
Okay.
I'll try to get the name.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. My memory isn't serving me at the end of the
No problem.
But, and my sleep hasn't been that great this week. But it was a study comparing those who participate in racket sports to those who participate in gym activities. And those who participate in racket sports lived a lot longer.
Interesting.
Well, I don't know a lot, but lived longer, right? Why might that be, based on what we discussed so far?
Gosh, you're stumping me here. I'm not sure.
Well, it's not a quiz. I mean, it is a question. I think some of the things could be social, could be cognitively, could be enjoyable. Maybe it's outside. Maybe there's movement variability beyond just stuff that's more linear in the gym. Who knows? And when people hear that, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to not go to the gym and only play tennis, right? It could also be socioeconomics.
Sure.
Who has access to it? Come on.
Right.
Like, let's be honest. So it could be a variety of things, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah. What about something like kayaking? Would that fall into that category?
That's a good question. So there's two types of skills, and there's not one or the other. It's actually on a spectrum. So there's closed skills and there's open skills.
Okay.
Closed skills are things that are very predictable. They're bound by time, and there's not too much skill involved in terms of open skill.
Okay.
Let me define skill. Open skill is more cognitively demanding. The environment's always changing. You don't know what to expect. And there's this dual element. You got mind and body. Now, the classic example of a closed skill would be an exercise bike. You're not going anywhere, and you don't need to think about anything. It's cyclical. Unless you have like Parkinson's disease, it's relatively automatic, right? Does that mean Peloton is super closed skill? No, because with something like Peloton or something similar, you have to pay attention to an instructor, and there's a lot of variability. Not always HIIT training, but there's variability and parameters that are externally goal-oriented that you have to pay attention to, right? Track that and stuff like that. And there's gamification elements. So it's not close skill as just being on an exercise bike and kind of spacing out. Now, does that mean being on an exercise bike and spacing out is bad for you? No. You can get cardiovascular stimulus that indirectly is good for the brain, right? That's good. So, but then if we go to the other end, we have those open skills. If I play tennis, I may not know what to expect. There's no sets and reps. I might have a game for 20 minutes and we play. There are sets and there are games and there are points, but it's relatively unpredictable. I don't know where the ball is going, right? And that's for most sports. So that's the difference. In the closed open skill spectrum is that it's a spectrum, right? So we can translate and plot certain activities on this spectrum. So based on that, where do you think kayaking would be? Would it be more closer to the closed skills or more closer to the open skills?
I would say it's probably somewhat in the middle, but maybe, yeah, I don't know. I would say probably in the middle.
Right. So it's not entirely like automatic.
Yeah.
And you do have to learn, like if you're swimming, right, you have to learn how to swim.
Right.
So there's that skill, and that is cognitively demanding. And don't forget about enjoyment. I would say kayaking, once you get it, with the understanding that how explorative is it? Like, is there a lot of spatial navigation, right? Depends on the type of kayaking you're doing. If you're just going in the harbor, you go around the harbor, this and that, and you're just kind of doing this.
Closed.
And you kind of, it's a little bit more closed, right? Once again, either or, it's a little bit more closed. So said, but if you're like, there's people who like backpack with kayaking and like, there's a lot of, I don't know if I could do that. They look at a map, or like this way, like there's freaking adventures, So that's very cognitively demanding. But there's still straits where you're just kind of going at it, or you're responding to rapids and stuff like that. That's closer to the open skill. Now it's more of a sport, right? So it depends. It depends. Now, regardless of where it is on the spectrum, would it be good for you?
Yeah, I think so.
So there's the one hand, there's the overthinking it, and then there's just like accepting the generality. Would be nature and the enjoyment, and maybe doing it with someone. Oh my gosh, like I want to do it now, just talking about it, right? Now, does it have the same cognitive demands as dance?
Probably not.
Okay, so it doesn't have the same, and we probably say that dance is at a higher temporal demand, meaning there's more speed demands. And depending on the type of dance, maybe some unpredictability, maybe some more cognitive demand. If it's on a video, it's less social. If it's in person, it's more social. So we have all these ingredients, and the output is dependent upon the input. But just as we have these kind of generalized principles with diet, perhaps, things like variability, things like make it healthy, right? Things like enjoyment, things like, having it with other people, all these kind of principles in diet sometimes can translate to the potential brain benefits of that through exercise.
Interesting. So it sounds like I have to come up with some sort of movement or exercise here to complete this circle. I'm going to have to put some thought into that on what I enjoy.
Yeah. And it might be a new activity.
I was just going to say that.
It might be it might be, and there's benefit to novelty, because novelty is more cognitively demanding. It doesn't mean you should always do something new every time. But it's important to have novelty because of that demand, and as you learn it becomes less cognitively demanding, and that's why it's important sometimes to make it harder. Because now novelty within the activity itself, right? And that's going to provide more direct cognitive stimulation.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, because you mentioned something like mixed martial arts. It's something I don't have any experience in. I've played...
Or martial arts. I didn't say mixed martial arts.
Oh, not mixed martial arts.
Mixed martial arts. In martial arts could be a restorative modality, or like Tai Chi or Qigong, right? It could be boxing, right? And it could be fitness oriented boxing, not actual like competitive
Sure.
boxing. It could be jiu-jitsu, it could be karate, it could be Muay Thai. And you don't have to do the thing in the way that society defines
Yeah.
it. You don't have to go to a group class. You don't have to compete. Some people are more driven by that. That's fine. You can be inspired by it. Can you incorporate elements of boxing or dance into the 10 minutes of your high intensity interval session at the end of your 20 minutes of resistance band training 3 to 4 times or 5 times a
I
week?
like it. Yep.
So that would be a way to say, okay, it's burdensome to think about something. Could be worse to find a fun activity I enjoy that's in the neuromotor
Sure.
category, right? It's not that burdensome, but if it becomes burdensome to think about or we get analysis paralysis, there's ways of going about it. Or it could be extra gaming. Maybe you're going to buy an Oculus Quest 2 after this and play virtual reality ping pong
There we
with me a
go.
couple days a week. Or download a couple of apps I might recommend, like Supernatural VR, where you have two different colored bats and you're swinging at targets as hard as you can to music in these amazing 3D
That
environments.
sounds cool.
Could be that too. Oh, it's
Yeah.
great. So we're just going through the restaurant, the menu at the restaurant, and sometimes it's in French. You're like, "What is that? Like, what is extra gaming?" And I explained it to you. You're like, "Oh, that does sound good,
Yep.
right?" So that's how I continue to look at it. So, and if you want to go back to the restaurant because you liked it and pick something new that you haven't tried, great. You have your whole life for this.
Yeah.
It's like I think other people or some people are just they think when they establish the perfect routine they keep it, but you lose this idea of novelty, but it shouldn't compete with this idea of maintaining activities we love
Yeah.
for the rest of our life, right? So there is a trade-off between novelty and routine as well.
Yeah. 100%. It's super interesting. Okay. I have some thought to put into this. Since we're starting to talk a little bit about, because we talked about maybe it ends up being a new exercise that I learn. Let's go down the road of learning how exercise helps our ability to learn new things.
There's several things that go into this concept of cognitive reserve, which is basically your brain's mental gas tank, and it modifies that cognitive trajectory over time. It's a hypothesis. So mental health factors like sleep, diet, stress management, level of education, social support, positive affect, and cognitive demands. But within that, the cognitive demands can be split into a couple sections. There's cognitive stimulation. Stimulating activities could be socializing, playing games, museums, music, art. There's this whole category of that. Puzzles, games, stuff like that. Then there's cognitive training, things like brain games, like Brain HQ, for instance, which there's more evidence on Brain HQ than most other platforms, and I'm not pushing for it. But if you want to try it and you want to dedicate 10 to 20 minutes a day for 5 days a week, that's what the literature recommends. You can try it and see if it helps. And it might just help you get better at the task. It might transfer to tasks that's training, and it may or may not transfer to your real life. But then there's the idea of novel and stimulating experiences. So when we look at exercise, we put exercise in a box, actually quite literally. Usually that box is the gym. And we forget that we evolved somehow, and we probably didn't evolve by running on a treadmill. We didn't evolve by writing an essay in hunting, and I'm not promoting modern day hunting as the best activity because it's less cognitively and physically demanding. But we had to use a spear. We had to use our visual attention and auditory systems, our spatial navigation.
Yeah.
The prey was moving to and fro. We had to. It was It was an open skill with motor demands, and we're running and getting our heart rate up, right? And so when we go back to that cognitive reserve hypothesis and we consider this evolutionary neurobiological model of brain and body, it's called the adaptive capacity model and it was created by Dr. David Reichland and Dr. Gene Alexander. And it sort of justifies why we might want to consider training our brain and body together because that's how we evolved. And they evolved out of need, demand and supply, right? So people look at these evolutionary theories justifying barefoot training or long distance running or protein consumption or paleo, but nobody talks about the combination of the brain and body. It's usually very nutritionally focused. It's very niche and very tunnel vision, culty sort of pushing of a specific modality of diet or exercise, which I don't really like because long distance running is not for everybody. Paleo is not for everybody. Hunter gathering and drinking water that's baked by the sun is not for everybody.
Right.
So that's the problem I have is that it's like this privilege of saying, well, here's this kind of lazy justification. I've never studied evolution, but apparently that's my justification. And then kind of saying everyone should do that. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So the next thing is that if we were to look at making exercise, which could be understood as a polypill, which is a pill that does multiple things, and consider it a neuropolypill, meaning it does things for our brain in multiple ways. It helps with brain structure, it helps with brain volume, it helps with brain function, it helps with neurotransmitters, endocrine system, the neuroendocrine system. It helps with brain activity at the smaller level, new synapses, new neurons. It helps with cognition. It helps with mood. That's a neuropolypill because it does so many things from different levels. So look at exercise being a more potent neuropolypill, then maybe it behooves us to combine it with cognitive demands that are novel, that are stimulating, that are enjoyable, and potentially social.
Interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting. What about people that incorporate exercise throughout their day? So you were touching on a little bit of, our ancestors and how they, the hunters and gatherers and
Sort of the hunter-gathering behavior of movement.
yeah. So like
Yeah,
they were,
certainly they wouldn't set. Yeah, I see where you're going with that, and that's the physical activity exercise conversation. Higher levels of physical activity is good. More frequent of physical activity is good. There's research showing improved cerebral blood flow. I think the challenge is when people say, "Oh, well, if you get enough steps, you're good. Don't do exercise." But the reason I think we need to do it is because it's a very intensive, potentially, I shouldn't say intensive. It's a very focused, purposeful, structured time to get a very specific neurobiological smoothie, depending on how you're doing, right? And so, what's the difference between snacking and a meal?
yeah,
Right? It's the same concept.
true.
It's the same concept. What's better, snacking throughout the day or having one big meal? Or look, both probably have merit. So we want physical activity and we want structured exercise, both of which can have some degree of variety in a way that works for your life, in a way that's relatively enjoyable. So physical activity is important for the brain, and you can program for it. You can be specific about frequency, duration, type, right? Going for walks outside is great. I think when we start giving people all these criteria, it must be in nature for nature bathing because that's what helps people live. It must be barefoot or semi-barefoot. It must be in the sun. It must be this many minutes. It must be this many steps. We can't do that. We can, but we can't ask why a wide variety or high percentage of people may reject that, right? That's giving people rules, not options.
Yeah.
If we say there's a lot of ways to get physical activity and that is good for you, great. That's a different conversation. However, when it comes to exercise, once again, it's structured and it's purposeful. And it allows for the repetitive stimulus at a certain intensity or effort. And for neuroplasticity to occur, functional and or structural, we need effort. And sometimes we need novelty. And without that effort, I mean, you'll still get benefits with low effort, right? It's not to say low intensity is bad.
Sure.
Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga helps the brain and body significantly. But what we are saying is that you need to separate physical activity and exercise, do both of them, but exercise cannot be substituted with physical activity.
Interesting.
Certainly our ancestors may have not gone to the gym for 60 minutes to lift weights. But I'm sure, and I'm making this up as I go, but I'm sure that they did the hunter-gathering, the walking around, the physical activity, the cave chores, right? They did the gathering of berries and all that stuff. But the hunt was probably a very cognitively and physically intense, purposeful time that could last, 20 to 90 minutes maybe. That was the structured exercise. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm sure we could get someone to disagree with that, to agree with that, but that's how I would look at it. So that is the danger of hyper-simplifying evolution and using that to justify. Although I think I just did that for my own bias, but hey, that's what it is.
Well, I think
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to look at it, and it's something that people miss often when they look at how our ancestors lived. They think, well, they were moving all day long, but they don't realize that a lot of that movement was for specific purposes and that there was real effort that had to be put into it.
And also what they did then doesn't mean we should do it now. Like, this is what is needed for us at this moment in time. And so I don't think that what they did was optimal for the modern human being because stuff has kind of changed.
Yeah.
Our environments are changed, our brains have changed, our habits are changed, our bodies have changed. So it's like why are we trying to do what they
Sure.
did? You know, and I think in the modern day, just trying to do what another person is doing maybe isn't always the
Yeah.
best. Usually isn't. Because there's this individuality, there's a high degree of biological variability. So why, you know, there's quite a lot of distance between you and cave people. So
Hmm.
like, why are we trying to do everything they did? Like, if we tried to do everything that cave people did, we wouldn't be doing anything that we're doing today,
Yes.
right? At all.
Yeah.
Just like that level of thinking is super flawed, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think it's important to look at the history of it and take the pieces that are good and then realize that we have evolved since then and we live a
Yeah,
different lifestyle and we live in a much, much different world than our ancestors did. So, interesting
yeah,
way to look at it. Very good.
yeah.
Ryan, before I get to my last few questions here, where can people find out more about you? Is it on social or a website? Where can people learn more
Yeah,
about you?
so as I mentioned earlier, I have a course called the Brain Health Trainer course, which teaches all about this concept, all these concepts we're discussing.
Hmm.
It's primarily geared towards health and fitness professionals. If they want to learn more about the course, they can go to www.brainhealthtrainer.com, and people can follow me on Instagram at glatt, glatt.brainhealth.
Awesome. I will have all of that linked up in the description and the show notes. What else about the connection between exercise and our brain that we maybe haven't covered that you think maybe you'd like to elaborate on a little bit further?
Yeah, I think we didn't get too much into like the neurobiology,
Hmm.
the mechanism.
Okay.
I think are really sexy for people. I think we got to the practical first and we focused on it, which I actually prefer.
Cool.
Um, there's a variety of neurobiological mechanisms that occur with
Hmm.
exercise, and they're broken into three levels. There's the micro level, the macro level, and the behavioral level. The micro level is blood flow, neurotransmitters, things like BDNF, irisin, IGF-1, nerve growth factor, all these things that you hear about, but you can't see and feel,
Sure.
right? But you hear about them through the dissemination of science, good or bad, or through a research paper or some article highlighting this one particular growth factor that potentially underlies improvements in brain health and cognition as the result of
Mm.
exercise. There's the neurons and the synapses that can be modified either functionally and structurally by exercise. Then there's the macro. That's all at the micro
Okay.
level because it's stuff you can't. Maybe we think it underlies some of what you're feeling, which is at the behavioral
Mm.
level, cognition and mood. You can get acute or short-term benefits from exercise in those two domains, and then you can get long-term benefits once you've hit a certain dosage, either a certain number of hours, certain number of minutes per week, whatever that is. And I think we've defined some of those
Sure.
parameters. Then there's the macro level where if you held your brain in your hands, if it grew in size in one or more of the brain regions or as a whole, or changed in function in the way a specific region or a network talks to each
Hmm.
other, that's the micro level. So we could get into the nitty gritty of that. I usually start with that because it's the justification for why exercise is good for the brain.
Mm.
Alas, we are out of time.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to maybe touch on, so that's an interesting question: is why is overall exercise good for the brain? And I know you just kind of covered a summary of that.
Yeah, so I talked about the different mechanisms, and just to state it explicitly, exercise does act at all those levels,
Mm.
right? It does normalize neurotransmitter levels in different ways. It does normalize brain activity, both locally and in a network manner, depending on the form and the dosage of
Yep.
exercise. It does release trophic factors like BDNF, IGF, VEGF, NGF, irisin. It's all these different growth factors, and the profile of how those are released may be different depending on the dosage and the type of exercise, or at least and there's similarities and differences across certain modalities. And then there's the increase in blood flow, and then angiogenesis, the increase of blood vessels in the brain. There's neurogenesis, which can occur in the brain in certain regions and sort of being debated. The process of creating new
Mm.
neurons. Synaptogenesis, functionally or structurally, the connection between neurons to create stronger pathways. But then over weeks and months, the size of certain brain structures like the hippocampus can change as a result of exercise, not just aerobic, but also certain aspects like resistance training. The frontal lobe, right behind your
Hmm.
forehead, it has also been found to structurally and functionally modify in response to resistance training.
Mm.
The cerebellum and the basal ganglia seem to be uniquely responsive to motor training. White matter seems to be responsive to motor training and aerobic exercise and levels of cardiovascular fitness. So there's not like this one and not that one. It's all like, it's all of it, but you can maybe target certain regions or networks depending on the dosage of exercise. And then same thing with cognition. So if you had an attention goal, maybe your exercise program may not look the same if you have a memory goal. But a lot of exercise is also global in the fact that it kind of just improves a lot of different aspects of cognition maybe, but there's also some differential effects, but more research is needed. And same thing for mood. And mood is also mediated by the type of exercise, the dosage of exercise, so on and so forth. We know anything's going to help, but we don't know by how much. And the reason the research is not, the research is confident that exercise is helpful.
Sure.
What we're not confident on is the optimal sort of dosage, but we have these that sort of gather these like general inferences. That's where the numbers I have given come from. And those are confident to a degree. More research is always needed. But certainly, I think we're better off with a variety of those three categories of aerobic, resistance, and neuromotor, and adhering to some of the principles of cognitive demand, novelty, and enjoyment, and kind of pertaining to that and letting science kind of continue to figure out more of the specifics as we go.
Sure. And I think that everything you said there, it just furthers the point of the importance of having diversity in our exercise and having different forms of exercise, rather than for me just going out and walking my dog is not necessarily going to cut it.
Yeah,
So
that's right. Well, that's okay. You're doing that, and you should continue to do that. But hopefully, depending on your goals of primarily more energy and perhaps better cognition and mood, your homework is to find something you enjoy and 10 minutes to what you're already doing. Right. So and when you do find that one thing that you enjoy, and I'm curious, we can email. I want to maybe by next week, a week from today, you can let me know what you found, or at least you want to try. And once we get that, we can see, is it one day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week that works best for you. And you might find that it kind of solves itself a little bit.
For sure.
You might discover something really, get into, and the details aren't so important anymore.
I love that. It's super helpful. I'll definitely keep in touch with you on what that may be. Very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ryan, this has been great. My last question I like to close up with is around purpose. So who is it that you want to impact the most with your work, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the population I'm working with now, the geriatric population, for a couple reasons. One, I think the amount of access to health information historically and currently is not the same as it is for people like us. I think scientific dissemination and information dissemination is not the same. I think I just like working with older adults. I just like that population.
They're fun, aren't they?
And it's very rewarding. I think there's, currently missing grandparents from my life right now is also, I like being around. I like the intergenerational contact. I know modern day is not so big on that, but it is important for me. I like the pace that it goes at. I like that you don't have to have a lot of flair, come across super sexy, and not. I mean, the way that our generation and in our modern era, you need to be so impressive to get people to pay attention to you, and I think that's stupid. And I don't like that. I just, of course I want attention and value and all that stuff, but I don't know, it's kind of a turn off.
It's so true.
The other thing, when your cognition and brain health has a ceiling, the further away you are from that ceiling, the more there is typically to improve. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s, there's a cognitive peak and then kind of starts to go down as you age, 20s and 30s, right? And so with people like that, you can make improvements in cognition and mood significantly. I'm not saying they can't be helped. They can.
Sure.
But especially when there's research coming out showing that coordinative exercise for younger to middle-aged adults probably is going to help with cognition more than just plain old aerobic exercise. Forgot to mention that systematic review. Another reason you should do neuromotor. But older adults tend to respond with a greater cognitive or brain response to these interventions, especially ones that are more effortful. And especially when they are more effortful, there seems to be greater marginal gains. So scientific reasons, there's some personal reasons. It's also a big problem, this cognitive decline epidemic that's affecting primarily older adults, 60 plus. And I think that it just doesn't get enough attention or enough service.
Absolutely. I love that answer. I too love working with older folks. I'm obviously not working with them as much as you are, and not to the same capacity. But I think there's something there in terms of, you may agree that you're learning, like, yes, you're teaching them a lot, but you're probably learning a lot from them as well. Like, it might not even be.
Oh my gosh. The one thing that doesn't change with age, there's certain cognitive functions that do change with age, but the one thing that doesn't is long-term memory. And we just call that
Yep. Yeah.
Lessons from life experiences. And so like, I love learning from the people I work with as well.
Yeah. It's so cool. I love that. And to your point with our generation, people our age, it's interesting. It's something I didn't even think about, how much we always have to like almost put this front on and impress people. And I have to do that with my podcast. It's like, I got to be here all like smile on. And then afterwards I'm like, man, was I even myself? So I think it's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah, I think our society right now requires a very specific appeal. And it has to be interesting, and it has to be novel, and it has to look good, and it has to be sexy.
It's got to be loud.
It has to be in a specific loud, and it's got to be in a format, and you got to make claims, and it's just like,
it's exhausting.
Gosh, like, it is exhausting. And people are like, why don't you have a podcast? Why don't you have a book? Why don't you post on social media? Why haven't you done TikTok? Why haven't you invested in Bitcoin? Why haven't you out and done more barefoot stuff? Why aren't you actually? I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's exhausting. Yeah. Like, it's exhausting. It's part of, like, it's almost the health version of the burnout culture from entrepreneurship.
Yep.
Like, that's stupid. Yep. That's actually inefficient from a biological and a neurological perspective. And I'm not saying I'm the healthiest. I have a lot to do. I could benefit from all those things I'm hearing to a degree, but it's the overwhelm. Yes. It's that you're never good. And it's on to the next. It's like the societal health entertainment ADHD that's being facilitated, where it's like, it's got to be this new biohack of the week. And honestly, it pisses me off and fatigues the crap out of me. And people are overstepping in terms of their scientific claims constantly. And I feel like I have to play my role in trying to like bring people down to earth. The scientific literacy of most people out there is extremely poor. But people who want to optimize and benefit are so desperate to keep working on them. It's like an obsession. It's an unhealthy obsession. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
I appreciate that perspective. It's refreshing because we need more of that, especially in our generation and everything you see on social media. We need more voices like yourself. So thank you, Ryan. Thanks. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Bud. Have a good one.
You too.